Well, today, as you can see, is Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday. It marks Jesus' so-called triumphant entry into Jerusalem, when Jesus publicly rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, a jubilant crowd welcoming him, spreading palm branches on the road as a kind of first century red carpet. The VIP treatment was because the crowds were hoping that Jesus would be their long-awaited political deliverer, hoping he'd defeat the Roman occupiers and establish Israel's independence and prosperity once again. But of course, we celebrate Palm Sunday today, because within 5 days, Jesus was dead. Is Jesus' triumphal entry really his failed entry? Is it his failed entry? I guess to answer that, we need to answer, well, why did he die? And what does it mean? Why did he die, and what does it mean? And Mark, in his account of Jesus, thinks that those are absolutely crucial questions for us to answer rightly. That if we're going to understand Jesus rightly, we must understand rightly why he died and what it means. Mark devotes a huge amount of space in his account of Jesus' life to these questions. It's a bit of a surprise if you haven't actually read the Gospel before, as you read it, to discover that Mark devotes the first 10 chapters to all of Jesus' life and ministry, and then 6 chapters to just the last week of Jesus' life. He slows right down, gives us detail, that we might see why Jesus died and what it means. Today we look at just a short section of that part. It won't give us all the answers, but it will give us some of the answers to those questions. Now, as we come to this passage, Mark 14, 1-11, it seems to me that one of the keys to understanding it is to notice its structure, which you might have picked up as we read it through. It's what some of the smart literary types amongst us might call framing or bookending. Let me give you the kind of technical term so you can really impress your friends. It's called the sandwich. Okay? The sandwich. There you have it. See, as you may have noticed, the first 2 verses and the final 2 verses match each other. They're like 2 bits of bread outside a sandwich. If you were to read straight from the end of verse 2 into the beginning of verse 10, you wouldn't notice anything was missing, would you? But instead, we have this filling in the middle of the sandwich in verses 3-9, the story of Jesus at dinner. And by setting things out this way, Mark is wanting us to do exactly what you do when you make a sandwich. He wants us to keep them together instead of having them separately, to see them as one combined unit. He wants us to connect them and so to compare and contrast those 2 different parts. So what we'll do now, we'll step through the account, looking at the bread, the outside bits, and then the middle. And then I'll draw out what seem to me to be 2 of the more important contrasts that Mark wants us to see. So firstly, let's look at those 2 outside layers, the bread. In Mark's account of Jesus' life, the preceding chapters, verses 11-13, have seen a sustained verbal confrontation between Jesus and the religious authorities in Jerusalem. And we see that these religious leaders are clearly jealous of Jesus. They feel threatened by him, and they want to protect their patch. And so Mark tells us in verse 1, and not for the first time, that they were scheming to arrest Jesus and kill him. They want to put an end to Jesus. Their problem, however, is that not everyone shares their view. As Jesus' entry into Jerusalem showed, many people had very high hopes for Jesus. And now, as Mark tells us, the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away. Jerusalem was swelling with people as they came in to celebrate this great, important festival. To publicly arrest and kill Jesus might cause a riot. So what they are scheming for is a way to secretly get their hands on Jesus. Well, those first two verses are clearly matched by the other slice of bread, verses 10 and 11. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. See, here we see how their scheme was made possible. That Jesus would be betrayed by one of his closest, by one of the 12. That he could provide them the opportunity they needed to secretly get hold of him. The chief priests and religious leaders, we're told, are delighted. They offer Judas money. Matthew's account records it as 30 pieces of silver. And for Judas, it's a deal. He agrees and watches for a good time to hand Jesus over. So that's the two outer layers, the kind of scheming plans to secretly arrest and kill Jesus. At a similar time to when all that scheming is going on, Mark narrates an event happening in Jesus' life. It's a fascinating scene with two surprising, shocking events. We're told that Jesus is in Bethany, just a few kilometers out of Jerusalem, having dinner with his disciples at the house of a man named Simon. And we can perhaps imagine, the usual evening meal, the food being eaten, the drinks flowing, the chatter of various conversations. And then a woman comes in. Throughout the whole story, we're never told her name. And she's carrying an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. And she takes the jar and pours it on Jesus. And if you're like me, you're probably sitting there going, what in the world? It's not exactly something that we see happening around us every day. Imagine someone were to come into morning tea and pour perfume on someone. We'd think they were crazy. It's interesting to note that the disciples aren't actually shocked by her putting perfume on Jesus. They're shocked by the amount and value. See, they weren't shocked simply by the act of putting perfume on him. It seems because it was actually a relatively common thing to do back in that culture. Back in their day, you might put perfume on someone for two main reasons. And the first and most obvious reason was as a display of personal gratitude and love and devotion. I guess you might say it's a bit like the first century equivalent of taking someone out to a high-end restaurant. For us, whether it's, say, business associates or good friends or your spouse, to take someone out for a good meal is a sign of appreciation, of thanks, of love even. And it seems that is what this woman is doing. We aren't told of her background, but clearly she has known something of Jesus' blessing, his mercy, his kindness. And she wants to personally show him her gratitude and thanks. But the others there are shocked. They're shocked because the woman doesn't just give Jesus a few drops of perfume, like a morning spray of Chanel or Armani. No, she breaks the jar and pours the perfume, all the perfume, on Jesus. Our Bible editors, as you might see there, call this story Jesus anointed at Bethany. But he's not so much anointed as drenched. He's drenched at Bethany. And what she poured on him is a very significant amount, is worth a very significant amount of money. We're told more than a year's wages of a basic income. I'm not sure quite exactly what that is for us. Shall we call it $40,000? Say $40,000 worth that she's poured on him. Last year, a bottle of Penfold's Grange Hermitage, 1951, auctioned for $51,750. And you see, it'd be one thing to take someone out for dinner, to show them thanks and love. But imagine if you took someone out for dinner and popped that bottle of Grange. See, they are shocked at what she has done, at the value of what she's done to Jesus. Isn't it excessive? Isn't it over the top? Isn't it a waste? Mark tells us the disciples were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. And you know, they do have a bit of a point, don't they, the disciples? I mean, according to the current World Vision gift catalogue, $40,000, that could help provide immunizations for 3,000 children, plus clean water for 10 communities, plus furniture for 20 classrooms, plus temporary housing for 50 refugee families, plus 4,000 goats, and you'd have some change left over. So you could do a lot of good with $40,000, can't you? So it's interesting that when Jesus speaks, he defends her. Verse 6, "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me." Jesus comes in to bat for her, to defend her. And as he does so, he gives what I think would have been the second big shock of that evening meal. Verse 7, "The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me." She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Earlier I mentioned that in that culture there seemed to be two main reasons why you might anoint someone's body with perfume. The first was a gesture of appreciation and devotion and love. But there was a second, more somber reason. If you were dressing a corpse for burial. You see, in first century Palestine, the custom was that you'd prepare a dead body for burial by covering it with spices and perfume. And Jesus says, shockingly, that she has just done that to him. I don't think he means that she intentionally thought that she was preparing his body for burial, but he's saying that's how you must understand what she's just done. Think of it not just as an act of devotion, but as preparation for burial of the dead. See, he defends her action because she has done it to him, and he will soon be gone. Jesus knows his death is near, that his end is nigh. So, let's try to pull it together. What do we make of this account, of this sandwich of events that Mark presents to us? I would love to hear your thoughts and reflections afterwards. Here are two observations that I've had where I think Mark is wanting us to connect and contrast what we see in those two parts of the narrative. Firstly, that would contrast two plans for Jesus' death. That would see the wicked scheme of people, but also the loving sacrifice of Christ. You see, in those outer sections, we see one plan for Jesus' death, don't we? We see the wicked scheming of people, their self-centered plotting to kill Jesus. And perhaps we could just think that Jesus died simply as a result of the cruel, sad fate of history. A good man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But by joining in that middle section, Mark wants us to remind us that that is not the case. No, Jesus says, "You will not have me much longer. She has done this to prepare me for burial." See, Jesus is 100% aware of those schemes, yet he doesn't try flee or hide. Indeed, as you read through Mark's account of Jesus' life, it's clear that Jesus knows that he will face death in Jerusalem, and yet he still chooses to go there. He will give his life, he says. He will die knowingly, willingly. You see, we need to see both of those camera angles on Jesus' death. Yes, it's the wicked scheme of people, but it's also the loving sacrifice of Christ. You might be wondering, why? Why would Christ sacrifice his life, willingly give it up? Might I say, come back on Good Friday? Well, please do, but let's briefly go down a few verses. Come down with me a few more verses. There's another meal Jesus is celebrating, the Passover meal with his disciples. And as he does that, we read verse 22, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. See, here's one of the places where Jesus is trying to interpret his death to his disciples. And what he does is he connects the Passover with his death. He makes a connection between that great rescue which the Passover meal commemorated and his death coming up. See, Jesus understood that he was giving his life, his body and blood, as he says here, to bring about another great rescue. That he would give his life, as he says, for many, in their place, that they might be rescued. This weekend, you may have read in the news about that supermarket attack in southern France, another tragic event, and about the policeman there who swapped himself for a hostage and was killed by the attacker, and the hostage survived. And Jesus understands his death as something like that he will swap in for others, that they might be rescued, that he will take God's condemnation and punishment that our sin deserves, that we might be rescued and forgiven and set free. See, Mark wants us to see that while Jesus' death is the result of the wicked scheming of people, it is also the loving sacrifice of Christ, that he goes willingly, that he gives his life to rescue from sin, to bring us forgiveness and eternal life. And that's the first thing we see as Mark brings these together. I think there's a second contrast in our section, and it's a contrast between two valuations of Jesus. Many of us here work in valuations, valuing property or business or stocks or companies or the like. How do we assess the value of Jesus? Well, in those outer sections, we see the value that the religious leaders and Judas place on Jesus. Their valuation is that he is worth nothing, that he's a liability, that he's better off removed from the books. And as Judas does, if you can profit 30 pieces of silver in the process, well, all the better. What Jesus is worth to them is nothing. But what's the woman's valuation of Jesus? It's that he is worth everything. One can almost imagine her thinking, how can I show my thanks to Jesus? How can I show my love for him? She takes what was probably the most valuable item in her household, and she thinks Jesus is worth that. That's small change for Jesus. And she's 100% right, isn't she? See, surely Jesus, who lovingly sacrificed his life, that we might have eternal life, surely he is of inestimable value. Surely for us who have experienced Jesus' love and his grace and his mercy, his forgiveness, his salvation, his rescue, surely he is worth everything. See, I think as we look at this woman, we see the heart of a right response to Jesus. A response which says, look how much you have loved me and others. And so is excessive and unlimited in its love in return. One of the things that's interesting is that the others there probably wouldn't have objected to her using just a bit of perfume. But when she uses all of it, they say, what a waste. And some of us here might have experienced similar reactions from others. It's okay to go to church. It's fine to have your beliefs. It's okay to be a nice, moderate Christian. But to give so much of your time, of your energy, of your life, to diminish your career, or your marks, or forgo a spouse and family, well, that would be a waste, wouldn't it? That would be a waste, wouldn't it? Except that Jesus loved you so. Except that Jesus, God the Son, died for you. Except that Jesus, perfect and righteous, gave his life to rescue you from the hell that your unrighteousness deserves. Except that Jesus, Lord of all creation, came to serve and give his life as a ransom for you. Except that Jesus gave his body and blood to rescue you. For then, how much is Jesus worth? Everything. Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Palm Sunday. Is it the day that we remember Jesus' failed entry into Jerusalem? The day we remember that he was killed by people, that he was worth nothing except to be rid of? Or is it the day that we remember that Jesus' triumph looks very different? That he died as a loving sacrifice? That he is of inestimable value? That the one who loved us so is worthy of all our love in return.